So next we are introduced to this guy. And remember, I told you guys that I'm sitting outside filming with all of this background noise and, like my husband's making breakfast and stuff in there. And I'm doing it on purpose because when you guys watch this kind of stuff on YouTube and TikTok or wherever it is that you're watching this, we have a tendency to think in this very structured place that reality exists. So like our reality, the way that we actually are, is messy. There's background noise and there's breakfast making and there's, makeup is not great, right? But one of the things that Stranger Things is exploring is this idea of the internet creating a fragmentation between space-time and our identity. So this is important when we talk about this guy, and he is supposed to be very father-like in the very beginning of this, right? So he's going through these tests with his pupil, and the pupil starts off by doing just basic telekinesis. So I'm going to draw a picture. You're supposed to identify the picture. The next thing that he asks the pupil to do is to find someone in the building, right? So we talked about the idea of space-time. So now it's not just basic telepathy. Now I want you to find someone in the building, right? In a space sense. So that's important for the Stranger Things Hawkins Lab people, because they're trying to manipulate these multiverse dimensions, right? You ready to get super, super nerdy with this? Okay, so remember I told you that this guy's supposed to be a very parental figure. Believe it or not, this has to go back to the idea of Hegel, as in the Hegelian dialectic. So this gets crazy. So we're presented this scientist guy, and in this moment that we are seeing him, he's very fatherly, right? He's like concerned about 10. He says, slow down, be careful, so on and so forth. And then 10 starts to see things, and it's blood, and we are presented with this, something bad is happening. But the person who's the parental figure in this instance doesn't have control over it, right? This also has to do with the Bildungsroman. So one of the aspects of the Bildungsroman is to understand the people that were guiding you through this when you're in childhood seem to be these people who will always keep you safe. Well, one of the epiphanies of adulthood is that they can't keep you safe from everything. And this is one of those moments for 10. Now, the reason that that's also important is he talks about 6. 6 is trying to move the block, right? So telekinesis. 6 is not at the same level as 10, and we know that 11 is higher than 10. Right? The Hegelian dialectic basically says that we as a society go through these swings of trying to get it right. Okay? And there's a thing that had to do with like Plato's allegory of the cave and all of those things. But essentially, society goes from one extreme to the other extreme until eventually it gets to a middle point, and then it goes back from extreme to extreme to extreme. Okay? This represents this moment. Hang on. So the first thing, in order for the Hegelian dialectic to actually work, we have to acknowledge that things in the past weren't actually all that great, right? So just like the child realizes that the parents that like governed them and were supposed to keep them safe, like they're kind of fallible, like they don't do everything right. And sometimes they do really, really bad stuff, right? So too, we as a society look at our own governments and go, hey, that was not so great. What they did there, we need to figure out how to fix this, right? And that's why we go from extreme to extreme to extreme, okay? I know it seems like a bit of a stretch, but stay with me, right? Here's one of the things that Stranger Things itself is exploring, and that is the idea that the internet itself has created its own dimension. So we are projecting ourselves into this reality that seems to be this technicolor reality, right? And the way that we actually form our own identities is through memory. So you understand yourself being in this world as being this person who does this, this, and this. Here's the memory of my childhood. Here's my 5th birthday. Here's all of those things. In the past, you would look at a picture of you and your 5th birthday, and you would say to yourself, that was me, and you'd create a story. And it was my 5th birthday, and my mom brought in this big gift, and my friends were there, and you have little fragments of memory that exist, but you have to kind of create the story around that picture. With the internet, we actually, and with video, especially when we talk about video, with the internet and with video, now we have these long stories that are no longer part of our memory creation. Now they are an externalized self, right? So they are things that exist in time that are us, but also not us. So that goes back to Lacan, okay? So what does this have to do with this particular? So immediately following that scene, we have a complete blackout, right? We see the door blow in. 10 looks at us and says, both of them are dead. And then there's a realization in 10's eyes that death is actually coming for them. And then we have a blackout scene. And then we have a loss of time. And that, friends, is a Proustian metaphor. So essentially what's happened is we are creating a narrative of what has happened with what we are given in the present sense. And in the present, we have this. So the narrative itself switches so that we are now focused on this and we are constructing what happened in time, okay? We don't really know what happened. We don't know if it was 11. We don't know if it was a monster. We don't know what it was. But we, as the reader/viewer, have to come up with our own theories. When it comes to creating identity through narrative, we, as a society, have created another dimension. Okay, so we have created this self that exists online, and there are certain parts that we show of ourselves that creates a narrative that our reader or viewer is able to piece together to say, that is the identity of that particular person. The problem with that is that not everything is shown. So just like the Proustian metaphor, we've created our own Proustian metaphor in our identity. And that is part of the reason that you're seeing so many things coming out now that have to do with the idea of the fragmentation of identity. We've kind of created Horcruxes of ourselves. Like, we've created all these little identities. The problem with that is the problem of solipsism. So solipsism argues that the only thing that I can prove is that I exist. I think, therefore I am, and I don't know about any of that other stuff that's outside of me, right? But what if the way that we understand ourselves, which is through the representation of memory, what if the way that we understand ourselves is not a true understanding of ourselves? Like, if you can't really remember what happened and you go back and you look at a journal, you kind of piece things together. But now we've got all of these aspects of like journaling that exist online that seem so much more realistic and so much more technicolor. We're doing the exact same thing, sociologically speaking. As a society, we're looking back at the 80s or the 50s or the 60s with that type of nostalgia, because it's not just in history books. It's no longer just pictures paired with words. Now we have video, and video is very, very powerful. We also have all of these different aspects currently with video and the combination of video and language, and that becomes even more fragmenting. So, one of the big parts of Stranger Things is using the vehicle of the Bildungsroman, which is like the adolescent coming of age, to have all of us recognize that the identity crisis that everyone goes through when it comes to existentialism and becoming an adult and understanding that the world around you is basically going to forget you in time. We as a society are going through that right now. So this relates back to the idea of Plato's allegory of the cave. And if you're a fan of The Matrix, you know that The Matrix is Plato's allegory of the cave, and it all blends to the idea that reality is not reality, right? Everything that you believe is simply a shadow on the wall. And if you're interested, I'll put a link in this to Plato's allegory of the cave. But basically, it argues that what we know to be true is not true. And this particular aspect is not only a self, as in we're watching a single character go through this, we're actually watching a society go through this through Stranger Things. And that is where the Russians come in. And so that's the whole 80s isolationism. Now you're going to watch my cats fight while I explain. So the 80s isolationism was basically the United States was going through a period where we thought everything was fine, everything's great and dandy, and then we come to find out that, oh wait, the existential crisis that exists for our boys, for our society, don't worry, they'll be fine, they're brothers, for our society is the fact that, like, our society could be ended. Like, when we talk about Cold War and we talk about an arms race, like, there was an existential crisis for our entire society, and yet the backdrop of that happening was this 80s pop, you know, technicolor aspect of reality that existed. And so it was like reality versus non-reality. All right, so I'm gonna get a little bit into the fashion, and then I'll start talking about some of the general like symbol things that you can follow and get off of this like very super nitpicky kind of minutia that has to do with like pop philosophy and pop psychology and stuff like that. But if you're interested and you find this stuff interesting, please let me know in the comments and tell me that I need to do more of these, because they are kind of time consuming. If you think that this is a good thing that you would like to see more of, just let me know.